Well, good evening from the News Radio, 1120 AM and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I'm Bill London, and everything you know is wrong. Now, it's time for your crazy Oregon news, brought to you by Sean Sutherland. Now, in particular, he focuses on Medicare and Medicaid. And if you have questions, well, then you need to call his company, Ask Insurance, because people have questions about Medicare and Medicaid and just about insurance in general. So with Sean Sutherland, all you have to do is ask, and he brings you the news tonight. I do the wake-up call Monday through Friday morning, 6 a.m. to 9 on KPNW, streaming online at kpnw.com. And here's a look at some of the stories that we're going to be covering. So we're going to start off with mass transit in Oregon. And transit districts around the state are now bemoaning that they face large service cuts under a transportation package that's being considered in the legislature. Now, there's an employee tax in Oregon that actually subsidizes service, and they're bemoaning it because, well, it's only going to increase 0.08%. Now, TriMet and the Oregon TriMet, by the way, is the bus system in Portland, the mass transit system, along with the Oregon Transit Association, say that a phased-in 0.4% increase is needed. They say without the increase, 51 of 78 bus lines in the Portland area are going to be eliminated by 2031. In the Eugene area, Lane Transit District is also claiming they're going to be looking at cuts. Now, according to Lane Transit District, they say that transit agencies already had narrow operating margins even before the COVID-19 pandemic. And they said the pandemic, well, screwed everything up like it did life in general. For them, it brought changes to work and travel patterns. LTD says it's seen a big rise in remote work, and because their fare revenue is down from where it was 6 years ago, they're looking at massive cuts unless the legislature gives them lots of money. Jason Otten is the CEO of Lane Transit District, and he said, quote, "The loss of fare revenue and the increase in operating costs mean that transit agencies are going to be forced to reduce service, eliminate jobs, and cut transit off for tens of thousands of Oregonians who depend on it." So what's he really saying here? He's saying that people aren't riding the bus. If you look, for instance, in the Eugene area at the MX buses, which are these huge so-called fast buses, for the most part, they run unfilled. So you're running a huge bus and nobody is getting on it. The thing is, nobody is willing to talk about, well, maybe we need to transfer our energies into maybe smaller buses. Maybe we actually cut down on the different times that they run. You would think a transit agency would know when peak times are and when other times the ridership is marginal. But no, they want more taxpayer money to run buses that people aren't riding. So you may have noticed, if you've ever been in the Eugene area, that there's a number of schools in the Eugene 4J school district, and they have totem poles. Now, these totem poles were made a few years ago, and they were mostly done by students with the help of a professional carver. And they set these things up at a variety of schools. Bailey Hill School, Madison Middle School, North Eugene has one of them. There's a number of them. Well, now the school district is tearing them all down. And the reason is, according to the school district, complaints of cultural appropriation by indigenous community members. Now, the claim is that the poles don't represent people who are actually, well, I guess indigenous to this area, but actually they're of a type that represents tribes that are out of the region. And that made, well, the local Native Americans upset. According to the 4J district, the local tribes complained that not only weren't they representative of local tribes, but that the district did not have tribal permission to create the poles, and that the carver was not given the authority by the tribes to create them. So they want them removed, and the district is doing that. Interim 4J school superintendent Colt Gill says the polls are a form of what we would call cultural appropriation. Now the district says it's going to be working with indigenous groups to come up with some sort of representations at the school that are, well, more representative. So, Oregon Democrat U.S. Representative Maxine Dexter landed in El Salvador over the weekend to put pressure on the Trump administration to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who the U.S. government says is a Salvadoran MS-13 gang member and also a wife beater. Now, Dexter and 4 other Democrats were not allowed to speak to Abrego Garcia, nor, according to Dexter, does she know where he's being held. You would have figured they would have found that out before they got there, but no, this is simply, well, political performance art. Dexter claims the man's deportation is absolutely a constitutional crisis. The 29-year-old Abrego Garcia was detained by immigration agents last month and deported to his native El Salvador without what's called a due process hearing, according to his lawyer. Now, the Supreme Courts and the lower courts have ordered the Trump administration to return Abrego Garcia to the U.S. stateside. Government lawyers admitted that Abrego Garcia's deportation may have been an administrative error, but they pushed back against returning him, arguing that's up to El Salvador because he's an El Salvador citizen and not a U.S. citizen. Now, the president of El Salvador has said about this that he didn't have the power to return Abrego Garcia, saying it would be, I'll quote him, preposterous to smuggle a terrorist into the United States. Well, homeless service providers, Chuck Hemingway and Eric Garrity, along with 4 other homeless people that live near Bend in an area called China Hat Road, have filed a suit in the U.S. District Court seeking a temporary restraining order against the U.S. Forest Service to block the May 1st closure of China Hat Road less than 2 weeks before the deadline. Now, they're going to do this to do a bunch of forest restoration work, try to clean out dead wood, and do things to prevent wildfires in that particular region. Now, in case you didn't know, the area of China Hat is right there on the edge of Bend, and it has long been essentially a homeless squatter site with people living in tents in the forest and dozens, if not hundreds of others, living in decrepit RVs all along basically the sides of the road there. And it has been a problem for a long time. And they've tried to clean this area out before, and of course they end up in court. Now, dozens of homeless people who are in that area have now taken up a new legal argument. And this is something that we're seeing being used in other municipalities around the state, and that is they file disability discrimination complaints. And they've been at least successful in one case in Grants Pass getting an injunction. So what they want is to either delay or cancel what's called the Cabin Butte Vegetation Management Project and a related May 1st deadline for the homeless people to get out of the area before it's closed. Penny Gartner and Mandy Bryant call themselves longtime residents in the forest. They're people that are homeless and just deciding that's where they're going to live. And they say they're about to be displaced from their homes and lose everything, in their words, in about 40 days. So if the nearly 28,000-acre Cabin Butte Vegetation Project actually proceeds, then they say they, along with hundreds of other homeless people, will lose their homes. They're on Forest Service property. They're not supposed to be there. According to plaintiff Eric Garrity, I think at the end of the day, this action, this lawsuit, will make sure that the Forest Service is compliant with their own regulations, and those regulations have a beneficial impact and keep the entire community safer and healthier and happier. How? The Forest Service announced earlier this year that it would close nearly 35,000 acres south of Bend to visitors and the encampments starting May 1st for at least a year to ensure public safety and support critical forest restoration efforts. Now, the restoration efforts is because, well, that area of forest has been absolutely trashed by the homeless camp, and they've left tons of garbage, human waste, needles, broken down RVs, and garbage just about everywhere you can imagine. The case is going to be heard in U.S. District Court in Eugene. So there's another area that's kind of like China Hat, and this is outside of Ontario, Oregon, which sits pretty much on the border of Oregon and Idaho, kind of in proximity to Caldwell. Well, one person was killed in a fire that erupted yesterday in a pair of transient RV vehicles and then extended through brush and burned down a home outside of Ontario. Malheur County Sheriff Travis Johnson said that fire crews also discovered the body of somebody who died in one of the broken down RVs that caught fire. Johnson said authorities are working to try and identify the victim who crews discovered inside a vehicle at an area that's just simply called the Flats, which is just on the west side of Ontario. The encampment has long been an illegal sanctuary for the homeless who've lived in recreational vehicles and also camp. The fire significantly damaged a house nearby and at least 3 more camp trailers. No other injuries were reported. Sheriff Johnson said that his office is now working with the Oregon State Fire Marshal to try and figure out what caused the blaze. So we have sanctuary cities, we have sanctuary states, and now Oregon, in particular the University of Oregon, has a sanctuary union. The United Academics of the University of Oregon just passed a sanctuary union policy. Now, among other things, besides, well, you're safe, I guess, if you're in the union, the policy also creates a legal defense fund for faculty whom they say may be targeted or suspected of conduct that is illegal on the part of the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement Service. The group is the exclusive representative of the faculty at the U of O, and now they're demanding that the university's administration join them in their efforts for a sanctuary union. Well, it is a sign of the times of what's happening in Oregon. Oregon has one of the highest costs of living in the nation, and when you factor in all of Oregon's taxes, it ranks in the top 5 of the most taxed states. And those taxes, of course, are inflicted on Oregonians by their lawmakers. Well, now it turns out the share of Oregonians working 2 or more jobs has risen rapidly in the last 2 years to the highest point it's been at this point in well over a decade. Right now, 6% of Oregon workers are holding down multiple jobs, according to the latest state and federal data, about 1 in 16 workers overall. The share of Oregonians working multiple jobs has been up dramatically in each of the last 2 years. Anna Johnson is economist with the Oregon Employment Department and says multiple job holding has generally become rarer in Oregon and in the U.S. since 1995. But she says that trend started to reverse and now is escalating after the pandemic recession. They never gave any reasons why, but again, Oregon's cost of living is high. Oregon has some of the highest home and rental rates in the nation, and you factor in with that some of the highest taxes in the nation, again, within the top 5, and it kind of gives you an idea of why now Oregonians are essentially working so that they can give the money to the state. A bill to kill Oregon's controversial wildfire hazard map has now passed the state Senate. We've talked about this off and on over the last few years. The map was created back in 2021, and the idea of the map was the brainchild, and he was the chief sponsor of the hazard maps. Meet Ashland Democrat Senator Jeff Golden. And the maps were supposed to identify high-risk wildfire regions and then require building codes to increase safety and, of course, costs. But instead, Golden's idea did nothing but cause havoc, confusion, and anger, with citizens claiming the poorly crafted maps caused skyrocketing homeowners' insurance policies, and others said they lost their policies outright because of it. So the legislature went back to the drawing board, and they came up with yet another type of wildfire hazard map, which again caused nothing more than havoc. And the maps, let's be honest, were absolutely ridiculous. I bring this up and I'll bring it up again. In Southern Oregon, right there outside of Medford, there was a duplex. One side of the duplex was considered at low risk for wildfire, and the other side of the duplex was considered to be at high risk for wildfires. It's a duplex. It's one building. And one side is, no problems. And the other side, oh yeah, this thing's going to burn down. It's a high fire risk. So legislators, including Golden, of course, claimed that the map wasn't to blame for people skyrocketing insurance and other people losing their insurance. But even with their denials, these same legislators, led by Golden, passed a law 2 years ago that prevented insurance companies from canceling insurance to homeowners in high-risk areas of the wildfire maps. Well, if they say that that's not why insurance companies dropped people's insurance, why it caused their insurance to skyrocket, then why did they need to create a bill to prevent it? So after the second equally flawed map was created, legislators, and in particular, Golden, drafted the current bill to scrap it. And Golden is now doing a victory lap, saying that he got the map repealed, that it was his idea to create to begin with. And after the disaster the maps caused, there's also another bill right now in the legislature to try and work with insurance companies to find ways property owners can actually maintain and afford their insurance coverage that went up in cost right after the maps came out. That bill moves to the House. So speaking of, okay, how are they going to pay for this? Legislators are debating Senate Bill 609. Now, it would actually do something that would help doctors, clinicians, hospitals, and just healthcare providers in the state, and that is substantially increase reimbursement rates under the Oregon Health Plan. And that would apply to primary care services provided by physicians, dentists, optometrists, and mental health care professionals. Now, the Oregon Health Plan is kind of like Oregon's Medicaid, but it covers a lot more people than what you would consider to be on Medicaid. OHP reimbursement, Oregon Health Plan, for primary care services right now, according to proponents of this bill, is currently half or even less of the reimbursement that commercial health insurers pay. And like I said, about a third of Oregonians are part of the Oregon Health Plan. It's a major part of the health market. Now, the advocates for this testified that the low reimbursement rates discourage from providers from offering primary care, which is true, and that it's led to long wait times and worsens outcomes for patients. The longer you wait to see a doctor when you're sick, well, likely the sicker you're going to get. However, opponents of the bill bring up some pretty good points, namely that the cost of the increase hasn't even been identified yet, and it would be prohibitive, and that federal officials who provide the vast majority of Medicaid funding, which goes into the Oregon Health Plan, will most definitely be unlikely to approve an increase. The bill is further compounded because it won't increase the actual state's payments into the Oregon Health Plan. As a matter of fact, according to the bill, no money from the state of Oregon is to come out of the general fund to fund these reimbursements. They're all depending on the feds. And under the current political situation, you can pretty much bet that ain't going to happen. Still, the bill passed out of the Senate Health Care Committee and it's now in the Joint Ways and Means Committee, where the Legislative Fiscal Office is going to figure out how many millions, if not billions of dollars, this is going to cost if it passes, and attach a price tag to it. Again, stay tuned. All right, your crazy Oregon news brought to you, of course, by our friend at Ask Insurance. So call Sean and ask him about Medicare and Medicaid. Now, he may not be the world's greatest expert, but he's definitely good with a lot of answers. And that's why he's called Ask Insurance. Call him, ask him, find out more. And particularly now with what considerations are with the Oregon Health Plan, maybe now would be a good time to go. Are they going to be making any cuts to try and fund this? All right, there you have it, your crazy Oregon news. And now we turn it over to Rick, who will roll out an industrial-sized can of real.